Okay.
is the ratio.
And so I just took that 6 less, and I counted that as 15 kids less.
Okay.
And was wondering how we came up with 130,000.
Yeah.
Because I come up with 90.
Yeah, well, and as I said, you know, Dale Dennis,
And was just wondering where.
I don't know, somewhere in the weighting, something changes. One of the things, for example, that changes is when you have fewer kids, one of the things we get is called low enrollment weighting. And it's based upon the number of kids you have. So that weighting changes. As your number gets smaller, that weighting changes. What you get
Would
for...
it cost us to get more money? That way?
I don't know. I don't have those formulas. That's why we always ask Dale Dennis.
Yeah, I
Yep.
just asking.
And these are numbers that I got from Dale Dennis. So
Okay.
the 130,000, but he did say it could be off by as much as 20 or 25,000. I mean, there are things that get changed that he doesn't have control over. For example, the transportation weighting. Every year the legislature changes the transportation weighting, so he makes his best guess about what that may be, but it may not be quite right. So the 16,000 is a number that's based on the percentage we got from SDAC at their guess at this point, and the salary schedule is one that I calculated.
Well, I'm assuming then that 130, if we went back to last year's budget and you changed those numbers, it would apparently come up to somewhere around the 130 then.
It would probably be close, as I said.
Well, just, you know.
The low enrollment rating would change, and so would the transportation, and at-risk also is calculated on a percentage basis. Okay. We do have, in terms of how do we look at meeting that type of budget amount? We do still have some room in our local option budget. That would probably cover somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 75,000 of that if we were to take our local option budget to 30%. That's the most we have authority for. The impact, obviously, on the local folks is that raises their taxes in order to do that. Other areas that we can look at is, well, let me just start down the list here. Some of these we've already talked about. I'll just start scrolling up through these. Some of the things that we've talked about as possibilities: freeze professional development. We get some reimbursement from the state for professional development, but at this point, what they've talked about is we would get no money for professional development. It's a small amount we get right now, but that would be the approximate amount that we would save if we just froze professional development, said we're not gonna do any, for a year. Another item, modifying library hours. This would be, reducing library hours by 2 hours a day. So it closed earlier in the evenings and was open 2 hours less on Saturdays and Sundays. Doing a temperature setback, which we've already done a little bit of. That's a real rough guess. It may be significantly more than that. It's just hard to tell with our building what we might have. Another item is either doing away with lunchroom second entrees. This is not doing away with seconds, just second entrees. The person that does our review of our food service stuff gave me that number and said that's what it costs for us to do the second entrees. One option would be to still provide them but charge for them. One would be that we just don't do a second entree, still offer seconds like fruit, vegetable, and rolls, but not at the entree. Discontinue summer school. Once again, this one could impact us in terms of making proficiency with kids, because the criteria we use to identify the kids that need to have summer school are those. One of the criteria we use is kids that aren't proficient on state assessments. The little asterisk that's out to the side of that is because that would be for the following year. We have already funded summer school. Different budget lines in your budget, once the money is placed in there, you can't take it back out. So it's actually already funded, so we can still go ahead and have summer school, but just not budget it or fund it for the following year. And then we start getting into what we would say if we start reducing staff in various areas. Custodian, these are kind of average numbers. Library aid, and I'm just going to run through these. These are sort of in order, but they're not in a set order. Paras, these are not special ed paras. These are classroom aides and district hires. And I'm just going to keep scrolling down. That's a pretty significant list when you look at the impact that has on our operation. You've got 2 custodians in there, 4 classroom aides out of 6, a couple of library aides. I thought I had 3.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I did. That list comes to $197,000. And a pretty good chunk of that is in those first 4 items that are right there. Another area, this is classified staff. Certified staff, just to give you a sample or idea. Producing 3 FTE of certified staff would be about $132,000. These are all of our sports supplementals.
It's currently this year.
That's current, yeah. And that's just sports. You did include things like extended days, contracts, and things like that, which could be included, but this was just for sampling purposes. The main reason for looking at this one would be we do have a few sports where we have third coaches as opposed to just two coaches. You don't save a lot of money reducing the number of coaches because we're not able to pay them a whole lot to start with. So, but if we do something, if we do make reductions and have it be, representative of across all the areas of our operation, there probably ought to be some of this area as well. So, we have a number of different areas that we can look at, things that we can try to do, combinations between increasing local option budget and making some reductions in staff. Later on in the meeting, we're going to be looking at high school class numbers. We looked at elementary numbers and saw some projections there in February. We'll be looking at something kind of comparable to that in regards to high school here in a little bit. One of the things, the same thing that we talked about that is reducing our budget with the declining enrollment is the same issue we have to look at in terms of staffing. Realistically, every time we lose 15 to 20 kids, we probably need to be looking at somehow reducing staff someplace that's equivalent to 1 FTE of staff. Otherwise, we end up having an extremely low student-teacher ratio. Not that that's not great to have, but at some point you can't afford it. These are just all examples of things that can be looked at. And we're at this point, we're not at a point to have to make decisions. But I want you to be able to see these and start to be thinking about some of this. What's going to happen from a legislative standpoint from the state, the governor's amended budget proposal has been approved out of both the House and Senate Education Committees, and I think it may have been approved out of one of the two Houses' Appropriations Committees. It has not gone before the main floor yet, in either House or Senate. At this point, there really isn't much discussion, or you don't hear too much about resistance to that as a proposal, so that doesn't mean nothing will happen to it, but the fact that you're not hearing things leads you to believe that that's likely to happen. What will likely happen is no action will be taken there until they hear back from the Consensus Revenue Estimate Committee, which is supposed to meet the first part of April. Once they meet, they will have a better idea of kind of how the state looks in terms of revenue coming in, how the shortfall is going to be. Is it going to be bigger? Is it going to be smaller than the estimated? Same as what they estimated. Because what they've talked about for several months is somewhere between $800 million and $1 billion shortfall in revenue. And so if there were to be a sudden increase in the shortfall, it gets bigger, becomes a $1.2 billion or something like that, they would probably be less likely to just take the governor's amended budget proposal. They may do something different with it. So we probably won't know for sure until the first part of April least give you the numbers of things that we can look at. And right now you have a ballpark idea of what kind of targets we're going to be having to try to hit. Are there any of those numbers that you have questions about? Of any of them presented? No other comments or questions, I'll go on to the next item.
The question I have is that we do have to trim 154,000 out if we don't get more students based on
At this point.
at this point. I mean, that's almost the positive side of this whole picture. That if the state aid would happen to get legislature puts it less coming this way, you know, we're saying that everything's gonna be status quo almost.
Right at this point. That's
So
what I'm saying.
154 is to me, is a chunk of change here, and it could go up over 200,000 real easily. So it seems to me like that we need to really, really tighten the belt and seeing what we can do to work on this. It kind of goes back to the calendar in the sense that if we can stop 1 week short, I'm not drastic, I don't think we should take a drastic measure, but I think that if we could stop 3 days, we save a little bit of money that can be, or a head start on. And we need to be looking at that. Not so much, I'm not the one ready to jump into a 4-day week, but I think that we've got to look at 154,000 is a lot of money. And we've got to start projecting that in what we do on every day. Maybe we need to turn the thermostats another 2 degrees, depending on whether it's heating or cooling.
And there are, I mean, one of the things that I didn't have on that list up there, I mean, there are all kinds of supply and materials budgets, but the reason I didn't include those is we've only increased those the last couple of years by a very small amount. Prior to that, I don't think they've been increased for Mr. Mostly, Mr. Berger, 10, 12 years maybe. Teachers may know that better than anybody. And I think there may have been some reductions, maybe even 8 or 9 years back. So, I mean, those are things that we can look at, and my concern about that is I know our teachers, and they'll make stuff work in the classroom some way or another, and if we start looking at cutting those budgets, they'll start paying for stuff out of their own pocket. We have some to do that now. And we're trying to avoid that. We have some to do that. So when we have 80% of our budget is tied up in personnel, that's where we have to look primarily. We have to make reductions. And as significant as that number is, even if we did not have the type of economic situation that we have right now, even if the budgeting increases that had originally been proposed and placed in a what is now laughably called a lockbox by the legislature, even if we had had those kind of increases with the declining enrollment we have, we would still be facing having the situation of having to look at how we're going to cut probably positions. One, because we have declining enrollment, but two, the amount we're going to get per kid just keeps going down for us. So we've got to keep looking at that pretty intently. So.
Well, if we charged for entrees, basically charging per seconds, and making that get somewhat to a break even, looks to me like would be a good thing to do. And they can pay for seconds or bring a peanut butter sandwich with them. Can you have peanut butter in school?
If you bring it yourself.
Well,
Actually, I don't think we have any kids with allergies right now.
Yeah, we do.
well, scratch that. That's something else.
Any other questions or comments on that? We'll go to the next item, because the next item ties into this. If not, we'll move into the high school class size numbers. And I think, board members, you do have a file on your computer that you can pull up. I'm going to be putting one up on the screen for the benefit of the audience too. The one that's going to be on the screen is a little bit different from what you have on your computer. These are junior high, high school positions listed on the side by class type, and then number of kids per hour, class totals, and average class size, and I'll explain how those are derived in a minute. If this were a big district, I mean big like as in 5A, 6A, you throw numbers like this up on the screen and you say social studies PE on the left-hand side, and nobody knows who that is because that might represent a dozen people. In a district this size, even though we just have it up there by class sort of title, people know who it is. So I wish that weren't the case, but because for some, it's going to feel real personal, as you'd expect. So, but the purpose was to try not to directly identify people anyway. And the other thing, before we start going through these, I can guarantee you that when we get to some of these where they have low class numbers, if you were to talk to the teachers that have those low class numbers, it's not by design, and it's not because they want to. They would prefer to have more kids. But we have, once again, declining enrollment. And so what our challenge is, as we look at these, as we look at elementary, is how do we use the staff we have? How do we take advantage when we have retirements or when people resign or things like that, to move people into positions that we can to still provide the services for kids and try to boost some of those class size numbers up. So, as you can see, those are the numbers. I got these numbers from Mr. Bergen here a few weeks ago. So you can see the class total. The average class size is, you take that total and divide it by the number of class sections. And it's not the same for each, because in order to try to compare these similarly, there are some positions up there where the person does some high school classes and some elementary classes. The elementary classes are not included, so if they have, for example, a couple sections of elementary, then their divisor on the average class size might only be 4 instead of 6. So that's how those numbers were arrived at. Mr. Bergen, do you have any comments that you want to make? I can put the other one up as well if you wish.
Oh, no, I don't, no. The class sizes, they've changed, some of that's based on, well, the majority of it's based on the number of kids we have. I think 10 years ago when I got here, we had 226, 7th through 12th grade. And now we have 165, that's just head count, it's just a 712 building. So that's the main reason why the numbers are like they are. We have more state requirements and different state requirements, so that causes some kids to take classes and they can't take electives. Some kids want to meet the Board of Regents, the Regents recommend curriculum, so they take classes to meet that, so that might, they don't always get to take other classes that way too, so that limits some of the electives. And then we have electives that are also opposite required classes. And sometimes classes, I try to keep classes that are core classes consistent number-wise. And sometimes that works okay, and then sometimes if it's by elective, it doesn't always work out to be even. In one section, if an English class 1 hour and then the same English class, I try to keep them that way. So yeah, those are varying reasons why sometimes why the numbers are going down, but those are mainly just population, number of kids we have. If anybody has any, I'll try to answer any kind of question or if you have anything that comes out at you or something. We also have we have teachers that share, so we have some teachers 4 or 5 that do high school, middle school, elementary, and so they have to be worked in so that it would fit in their schedule. When they're not doing elementary, they have to go to junior high, or if they're not doing junior high, they can do high school. So we have to get that all worked out so it all fits together. So it all can be the same schedule, so or close to it, so they can all participate. Especially the music, art, PE, band, chorus, singing, they've got the whole thing, everything in there, so it's got to kind of jive together, and they have different levels that they do. Numbers get skewed a lot, you can see that opposite band, because band has been a big thing for a long time, so the numbers, that's just the way it is.
One of the
For
things
junior
that,
high too.
one of the things that a lot of districts that are our size or smaller are having to start to face is they're having to start to look at, as Mr. Bergen said, there are a number of things that on this presentation that are things we're required to do, but some of them are not. And so districts have to face the real issue of at what point do we say we just can't afford to offer that program. I don't think we're at that point in our district of having to eliminate any program, but for the board to keep thinking, what if we lose 15 to 20 kids a year for the next 5 years, we no longer at the high school are going to be at say 165?
It's at 712.
Yeah, we may be at 110. And so, how do you still try to present and have a comprehensive program for 110 kids and still be able to pay for it? Is what the board has to be looking at. So, Mr. Bergen and I have had discussions looking at some possibilities of things that we might do with some of the staff to try to increase some of the numbers for some of them. But it depends a little bit upon, as I said earlier, if we have retirements, resignations, things like that. Those all are times when those are opportunities for us to try to reorganize, to kind of shift some of those loads other places as we have openings occur. The one I guess I would point out is this past year we reduced one full-time position in our shop area. And as you can see, the class size totals up there, that's just almost identical to what we had in terms of total number of kids with two FTE of staff. So that meant that the average class size prior to this year was about 4. And so had a retirement and took advantage of that, restructured some, still are able to offer almost all the same classes we had before, still have the same type of enrollment. So it's those kind of things that we're going to have to look at and continue to be able to try to do it. So.
Is it proper to ask another school district on what theirs looks like now?
Sure, I mean, you can ask. One of the things I would point out is, as I started out, I said this would be a lot different if we were in a 5 or 6 day school. One, because you wouldn't know who those people are on the left, and we all, for the most part, know who they are. But also, you wouldn't see numbers like those at a high school. You would see average class sizes out in that last column that are going to probably run between 20 and 25, I imagine. But that's just something you recognize in a smaller school district. To put on a comprehensive program, it's going to take more staff to produce the same type of program per kid. So, I mean, when we see an average class size number up there of 12, that's a pretty good class size. One of the things that I know Mr. Bergen would agree with probably pretty quickly is there are a few classes that we have multiple sections of them, and it is conceivable we could collapse some of those down to have one section. Let's say we have a math section that has 1 hour, it has 12 1 hour and 5 a different hour. Collapse them down to be one section of 17. You can do that, and then you say, okay, what are we going to do with that teacher? Do we have another math class they can teach, and are there kids that will be in that class? And then also, are we going to be able to schedule those kids? Because every time you create a singleton section, a singleton class, where there's only one section of it, it gets more difficult to schedule all of them. And we already have a significant number of singleton classes in our schedule. And that doesn't mean we can't create some more, but it will get more difficult to schedule as we go along. So.
Well, Maxville's closest in size around here. I was just curious on what they had, because we're going to be, I think they've got 40 less kids K through 12 or something than we do. Don't quote me on that, but I was just wondering, because most of their classes will have 21, 22 kids in them.
I don't know.
And I was just curious on what they had, because we'll be there in another size-wise, where they're at now.
Well, vocal and art, and there's probably something else up there I'm not seeing, but